Hi, my name's Leo WT, and you have found your way to the Conversations podcast. Conversations exist to create spiritually minded conversations about life. We desire to create safe space for dialogue and community. We desire to come together regularly and intentionally to generate conversations about life, belief, and the intersection of the two. Everyone is welcome at the conversation.
We are live on Facebook. Hey friends, how are you? What is going on? This is a very interesting time for me to be online because Conversations typically happens on a Sunday. For those of you who follow us, you know that. But it is in fact not a Sunday. While I might have forgotten at least 2 or 3 times what day it was today, I know it's not a Sunday. But I have been actually on a kind of mental health reprieve with my lovely wife in Puerto Rico, and I am just getting back, just touching down here on the ground in the States and getting my life back together and kind of back rolling. So what we are going to chat about today is something that's been, there's been a lot of posts on the Conversations group page about this. There has been a lot of conversation. It's so many uses of the word conversation. But there has been a lot of just group discussion nationally, locally, politically around this topic. And so I wanted to get a friend of mine on here who I know, love, and trust as someone that has a real voice in the issue. And so my friend Owen is going to join me today. We are going to chat about transgender people in sports, the current intersections of transgender folks and politics. And also we are going to chat a little bit just briefly about the kind of, let's say, spiritual context or argument for or against trans folks. So we're not going to dwell too much on religion because those of you who have been here before know that we don't really try to stick to any one religious background or anything, but the whole goal of Conversations is to have spiritually minded conversations about life. And so what that means is we're just going to peel back some layers. We're going to talk a little deeper. We're going to talk about things that really matter. And we're going to give some real dialogue around issues that people usually end up screaming, at each other over. So I am real quick going to let Owen introduce themselves and then we'll get chatting.
Hey y'all, my name is Owen. I am a queer non-binary person. I use they, them pronouns. I've been living in Brooklyn. Well, I've been living in New York City generally for a little over 8 years now. Currently living in Brooklyn. I consider myself super lucky to be surrounded by an incredibly diverse community in every single sense of the word. New York is a place that absolutely has its Trump supporters and also has, everyone else you can think of, which just creates an incredible place to learn and dialogue with each other. Specifically, as far as my own engagement with that community, I've done some organizing work with queer and trans youth of color, queer and trans youth mostly of color.
All right.
As well as doing some education work in corporate and other settings, specifically around the topic of gender, its history, where did trans and non-binary identities come from, how do you navigate these situations?
Awesome. I have I don't know how much you like to talk about kind of your origin story here, but funny story that I can say without really revealing too much of anybody's background is that both Owen and I met while we happened to be geographically located at a conservative Christian college. So that was a really dope time.
Yeah, I'm sure we were both super happy. Best mental health times of our lives.
Absolutely. Living our best lives in that environment. You know what's ironic for me, and I've noticed that I'm just moderating conversation here, folks. So if you guys want to join in, you can, but so don't take my looking away as the act of indifference. But I have frequently said that I don't think, well, I can't say I don't think because, your gender identity is something that has a way of bubbling to the surface, even when you don't have words for it, but I don't know how easy I would have been able to have, just achieved coming out had I not been to NIAC. For me, that was a big moment because for as conservative as the school was, the area was less so. And then I was right by the
Yeah.
city. And the irony
Yep.
is, in moving to the city or in moving near the city and being in this kind of conservative Christian environment, I actually found some of the best community that I've ever been involved with, and a lot of that community was Afro-Hispanic and
Hmm.
evangelical. So just really interesting context for me to be like coming out
Yeah.
of. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know.
Yeah. Nyack was a huge game changer for me as well. It was the first time I ever went to public school.
Okay.
So K through seventh grade, I was in private evangelical schools. My family didn't have a TV. We went to church every Sunday. I went to youth group on Friday nights. I joined the youth group worship team as soon as I was old enough. So then it was just right after school on Friday. So, when you have Bible class 5 days a week, it's a lot of that. And all of these were very conservative Christian communities. So,
Yeah.
for me, Nyack was kind of a similar thing in a way. It was my first time in public school. I finally started to see another way of viewing the world,
Uh-huh.
besides this kind of fundamentalist evangelical situation.
Yeah.
And proximity to the city was also huge.
Yeah.
But I think, and you know, my parents, I think, did try to back. And you can speak to this yourself. I feel like my parents did try to back queer students on campus
Yes.
more than most, shall we say,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
was another thing that really helped open the world of possibilities to me. When considering religion, it was no longer I'm either queer or I'm Christian. It kind of opened up that potential for me.
Right. Yeah, there was
Um,
an option to walk through both doors simultaneously if you wanted.
hmm
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
funny that
yeah,
you say that because your parents were actually they're probably perhaps one of the biggest parts of my coming out story. I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but I was actually well, let me back up for our people who are
hmm
watching and don't know about Nyack. Nyack was a conservative Christian college in Nyack, New York, a branch, or it's associated with a conservative evangelical denomination, basically. And Owen's parents were just incredibly supportive to me when I was coming out at a time when my parents couldn't be because of their religious convictions. And so your parents, Owen, really, really it multiple times were responsible for me being able to like eat. And
yeah,
I'm That's not like a
yeah,
metaphor, they would like I would see them at church on the weekends and they'd give me a hug and they'd, slip some money in my pocket and tell me to go eat at Mana's or something.
hmm
They
yeah,
were great. And your dad actually, he and Michelle Pinkham looked me in the eye, and my name was sent across the president's desk to be expelled because I had come out. And your dad
yep,
and Michelle Pinkham went to bat for me with the school
yep,
and
yep,
said they would, under no circumstances, would they let the school kick me out. And if they did, that
yep,
there would be legal repercussions. And they said, they looked me in the
yep,
eyes and they said, we're staying until you graduate. And then the day I
yeah,
got my transcripts, I found out that both your parents and Michelle had decided to move on. And so that was a huge,
yeah,
I mean, just vastly formative moment for me. Like I said,
yeah,
your identity has a way of bubbling up, but I don't know what coming out
yep,
would have been like without the Meehans in my life. So,
yeah. Yeah. No, I mean that's really incredible to hear. My parents have shared a little bit more with me about, what was going on with you and some of the other students there as I've gotten older.
yeah,
But it's definitely not something I've heard full details on. I think because, they want you to be able to control your own story.
absolutely.
But it's one of those things where you know, I had I had a family in my own case who took me in for my last 2 years of high school. So after my parents decided to leave Nyack College, they ended up the best option was to move down to South Carolina so my dad could finish his PhD.
Okay.
Which at this point I was just starting to understand my queerness, barely starting to figure out my gender identity, and really was just thriving in Nyack. Didn't want to start over at a new school for the final 2 years.
And who wants to go to South
And my best friend's
Carolina?
family, yeah, yeah, like I love the food. There are indeed some great people down there, but it was just, I could tell it was not the time for me to be in such a conservative state.
Mhm.
And my best friend's family stepped up to the plate and welcomed me into their home for the last 2 years of high school, which really, it was really difficult for me. Something I've been thinking about more as I've gotten older is that I was a child when I was dealing with all of this stuff.
Mhm. Hmm.
and trying to figure all of this stuff out. And, in my experience, the conservative faith communities that I was a part of could be, I would say, unintentionally manipulative in those areas.
Hmm.
In some cases, it was more intentional. But people would be doing something with your best interest in mind, and it would be undermining a really essential self-discovery process.
Yeah.
So for me to be able to kind of not go into an environment where I would have had to have my guard up all the time was huge.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. All right. Yeah, that it's just such a wild context we came out of. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm really grateful. This is a complete aside and not in any way related to the topic, but I am really grateful that I think one of the beauties of a lot of queer stories is like chosen family, and I'm really
Yeah.
grateful for the people that choose to step up and be family. For especially
Yeah.
for people who are kind of in the soup of coming out, and I honestly,
Mhm.
as a complete, even more further aside, I think that part of the reason COVID has been so hard on the queer community in particular is because a lot of the queer community is not housed with their chosen family, right? A lot of times we're housed with our biological families, especially in multi generational situations. And so I think
Yeah.
that in particular, there's been a lot of struggles for the queer community around that idea of being, kind of
Mhm.
mandated to be away from your family of choosing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yep.
makes that kind of makes navigating conversations like we're going to jump into even a little bit more difficult because you got to monitor your own physical safety and well-being along with can I say what I need to say about what's happening right now. And so I know that for both of us we're in safe places that we can chat. As soon as this topic kind of started coming up, like we've never not been there as trans people. We're always the lowest common denominator of scapegoat, right? Like global warming, trans people, you know what I mean? Or whatever it may be, you know what I mean? Aliens, trans people, mediums. I don't know. This is something we're always the lowest common denominator. But I think that a lot lately this has been coming up more so because it's a
Mhm.
hot button issue that people can use to
Yeah.
curry political favor or political
Yep.
fervor, right? And
Yep.
so we can
Yep.
either get people on our side or we can push people away, whatever we need to do. And as long as we drop this issue of trans folks, it's I mean, it's like when you drop soap in the water and everything just kind of like, you know what I mean, like
Mhm.
pushes away from it. I
Yeah.
feel like that's what people try to do with trans folks. So um
Yeah.
let's go ahead and let me give my little spiritual just statement right now because it'll
Yeah.
be quick and
Absolutely.
succinct.
Yeah.
So for those of you who know I came from a Christian background, like Owen said, they understand that as well. But I just have to go on record as saying we're not going to talk too much about trans people in terms of a religion right now because the Bible doesn't say anything that prohibits people from being trans. And if you're going to live your life by the Bible, then I got to hit you with that fact, man. Some people aren't worried about it. Some people are past that or aside from that in their brain, and that's not an issue. But I know a lot of people are going to watch this conversation and try to say, but yeah, like, what about the Bible? And the thing is, I can give you a whole thesis on why the Bible is, in fact, not anti-trans and in fact in some ways pro-trans, and we can talk about the good old OG Paul himself, love him or hate him, but he said that there's no male or female like in Christ, whatever. So if you want to come and have a conversation about that, I would invite that. I will talk to you privately. We're not going to touch on that though, because today we're starting from the assumption that religiously there's no argument against trans people because religiously there's no argument against trans people. So, with that being said, I would like to break it down a little bit, and we're going to kind of flow in and out of this as Owen and I just kind of like wade our way through it. But I want to start by talking about the idea of trans participation in sport, and we'll go from
Mhm.
there because it's political, it's social, it's
Yeah.
athletic, it's religious, it's all of these things. But
Yeah.
um, talk to me about your starting point for this. Like when trans issues, especially trans people in sports, come up on the news, what's the first thing that goes through your mind? Because the first thing that goes through mine is like, again.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely. It's one of those conversations that at this point I do find somewhat exhausting for sure.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, yeah, my initial reaction is definitely pretty similar in terms of just like a heavy sigh, maybe a
Yeah.
little bit of an eye roll, something like that. And that, that doesn't come from a place of, I guess, being mad at anyone
Mhm.
necessarily. It's
Mhm.
more of just like
this is something that relates directly to who I am
Yeah.
and directly to people who I love.
Yeah.
If you continue to see this question pop up of, well, should people like you be allowed to engage in sports in this way?
Yeah.
It just gets tiring.
Yes.
You know, it's I understand that people do not have, you know, we're almost none of us are taught about these issues growing up. But it is just exhausting to continuously have your presence questioned.
Yes. And I think in this conversation, I've gained a little bit of lived experience by my orientation, right, and my gender identity and all that. I've gained a little bit of a deeper level or a different shade of understanding about conversations around racism, because I have. I'm gonna sound like that guy, but I have a ton of black friends. But no, I have a lot of black friends, and they've been so gracious as to let me learn by proxy, and not really push anything on me, but they let me see their
Yeah,
thoughts and how they're
yeah,
responding and their actions. And one thing
yeah,
I hear a lot from especially black women, but black people in general, is like, it's not my job to teach you about racism. It's
yeah,
your job to learn about racism, and there's Google searches, and there
yeah.
are people who's doing this work, and you can look up books and you can find podcasts. So I think as I have become a little bit more exhausted of having the conversation, I begin to understand a little bit more, at least intellectually, a little bit more about being black in America. So I had this moment of intersectional thought there where I was like, oh, which I understand is privilege in me getting that, but I started to feel it more.
I mean, I think it's one of those things where I guess what I would say is that marginalized people can use their marginalization to empathize more strongly with people who are experiencing a different form of oppression than they are.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that, you know, that person completely understands this other group's experience on any level.
Right.
It just deepens the empathy.
Yes,
It's like,
absolutely.
oh, like now I really get where you're coming from. You
Yes.
know, even if it, you know, there's so many differences, which is absolutely true.
Yeah,
But I think that I think there really can be a difference in empathy levels when you're
absolutely.
able to kind of process through stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely have felt that, like, in the process of realizing my own intersectional areas of marginalization, I have become better able to empathize with other people
Yep.
who are marginalized. And my hope in society would be that one day marginalized people groups can bridge our different areas of intersection to stand
Yeah.
up as a whole margin. Because once the whole
Yeah.
margin joins together, then the center should be scared.
Yeah.
But we
Absolutely.
have to be able to facilitate that, especially, like in intersectional,
Yep.
interfaith, or interracial type of movements. I need to be just as passionate about disability rights as I am about trans rights. I need to be just as
Yeah.
passionate about
Yep.
anti-racism as I am about anti-homophobia, that sort of a
Yeah.
thing. So
Yeah. Yep. Yep. No, absolutely.
yeah. So we're here and we're having this conversation despite being tired. I drank some coffee. You guys saw me drinking it on camera a few minutes ago. We're here. Owen woke themselves up. I got myself back in like American Standard Time mode. And we're gonna have this conversation because we both have a realization that people needed to hear this, and we figured if we do it now, then we can just drop a link instead of have the same conversation again
Yeah.
and again and
Yeah.
again. So
Yep.
a lot of what I'm seeing is people are really worried about kind of fairness in sport. That's a lot of the concern that I'm hearing on the top level. But
Mhm.
something that
Mhm.
I'm noticing is that a lot of the conversation, if you break it down, I'm the guy, like my saying right now in my grad school writing and in my conversations work and all this stuff is like, what's the thing behind the thing? So you're
Yeah.
saying this, but I'm hearing this. Like,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
saying you're worried about your daughter getting a college scholarship, but I'm hearing you're worried about the insanely high cost of tuition, like the thing behind the thing. So
Mhm.
why do you think that it's so easy for trans people to be this scapegoat, specifically in this context of like trans people playing sports?
I mean, I think there's just a general lack of awareness of what being trans actually means and looks like.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I've been thinking about a lot, seeing some of the threads that have popped up in the group,
is that a lot of people don't even realize that trans identities have existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah,
That's been pretty intentionally removed from our history books.
absolutely.
And as one little example of the intentionality with that, Crow Nation had more than two genders. I forget exactly how many, but one of which was Bade. And there was this person who identified as Bade, who was known to be this incredible warrior and also one of the best seamstresses.
I
So
love it.
really just like living their best life,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah.
Now, when American colonization came in, they specifically targeted Bade communities within Crow Nation. So
Hmm.
we need to abolish Crow Nation, but we especially need to abolish the Bade.
Hmm.
We need to remove them from society.
Hmm.
And that's something that's happened repeatedly
Yeah.
across the board. And it leads people to this place where it's okay, here's this brand new phenomenon of transness, of more than two genders. I don't understand it. I don't know how to deal with it. So instead of it becoming something where we're looking at each other with compassion, I
Hmm.
think it becomes something that people are a little bit scared of because
Yeah,
of that lack of understanding.
absolutely. And you're dead on. There has been so many different cultures and different people groups and different societies that have functioned
Every single
seamlessly.
continent,
Yeah.
every single continent.
Yep, and they've functioned with multiple ideas of gender. I want to say the first time that this idea came to mind, like that I learned about it, was when I was watching a documentary about a Navajo human being who was two spirited, and so
Mm-hmm.
in Native American culture, speaking specifically of this documentary that I watched, because I don't want to say that all Native American societies are the same, because they do have nuances, but I watched this Navajo documentary about a person who was two spirited, and the idea of two spirited is that there were five genders. There was masculine male, masculine female, feminine male, and then two spirited. And two spirited was a conversation, or an intersection is what I meant to say, of the genders, and they functioned fluidly. And not only were these people like allowed to exist within society, they were actually like celebrated, and they were actually kind of considered set apart in a certain way. And so this is something that's happened for, like you said, hundreds of thousands of years, where this is not a new phenomenon. We've been here by different names and in different places, but people need to ask themselves, why were we written out of the history books? Because history has always been written by the victor. And if a group or people group is put down or left out of the history books, like Black people, like Native people, like trans people, you have to ask why. Like, what threat did we pose to society?
Yeah. Yeah. And it also, to me, really gets pretty deep into intersectionality. It's really, really important to me as a queer person to focus on decolonization, right? And a lot of people get confused about why that is. And the reason is because colonization absolutely purged what we now consider to be trans identities from cultures around the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so much of colonization was steeped in these Judeo-Christian values. You have two genders, the only sexuality is straight, everything's tied to biology, that's the end of that. At which point, any culture that has more than two gender categories, that is fine with people of the same gender engaging with each other sexually, whatever, well, they're backwards, they're barbarians, they need to be saved from their heathenness,
Yeah.
and it's just one of those things where it's like, if we are truly going to decolonize, we have to figure out how to reincorporate queerness and transness into our cultures.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's part of that work is just kind of the reality of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's so many edges, right, of society that are cut off through colonization. And like the thing that it just like baffles my mind is the amazing amount of arrogance. Like, holy crap, the amazing amount of arrogance in the doctrine of
Yeah.
discovery, where some like rich white aristocrat, queen is like, bro, by my authority, you can go and search out and take over
Yeah.
everything the Bible
Yeah.
says. Like, what a co-opting of a book
Yeah.
in specific that was about colonized people. And then you get to a point where this has been happening for so long that now when trans people want to just be in society, it's terrifying and scary. And people are like, well, where'd this come from?
Yeah. Yep. Something I want to mention just before I forget. There's a really amazing documentary on Netflix called Disclosure. Disclosure specifically covers how trans folks have been portrayed in the media, the American media specifically. And really what it ends up talking about is what we are taught about trans people without realizing that we're being taught it.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
when we talk about explicit versus implicit bias,
Yep.
This documentary is about understanding where implicit bias when it comes to transness may come from, at least in part.
Yeah.
I watched it as a trans person. For me, it was one of those things where I was like, oh my God, this is so validating, in a lot of ways. But it still taught me things.
Yes, absolutely.
As someone who's trans and looks at the media all the time and tries to think, oh, it never occurred to me that this stereotype is constantly reinforced in this way.
Absolutely.
So I suggest strongly that people watch that as part of really trying to understand, what thought process are we taught to have about this people group without necessarily realizing that we're being taught it.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing that I liked about that film was there was a plethora of black and brown trans people, and it was, if not exclusively, it was like 99% trans people. And a lot of them were trans women of color, including trans women of color who did their whole career. They lived their whole thing and no one knew they were trans. And at the end, they were like, well, I'm trans. And it didn't change anything, like, by the way, I'm trans. And I'm sometimes caught up in the amazing amount of courage that would have taken to be trans. I think
absolutely.
that a thing I'd like to talk about. Oh, let's see. Justin, my friend, is a history teacher, and he said that's why divine right monarchy had such an ill effect on Western society. We still have that issue when talking about the lack of separation of church and state. We will say things like Trump was given to us by God. Exactly. There's a conflation of like you said, divine right and in government, especially in America. There's definitely an unholy and unhealthy enmeshment happening. I think that's something that's really important to note too in this trans and sport participation specifically is that there are many people, like thousands of people who are born and do not fit inside the binary. So like I myself was assigned female at birth, and I have no indication that I was anything other than female genetically or anatomically. However, the way that I am as a human is non-binary, period. Don't fight me on it because I won't back down. I am both. I embody both masculinity and femininity, and I think that's dope. But there are people. I actually read a statistic the other day. I think it was yesterday. My friend posted that intersex folks occur at the same rate as people who are redheaded. So if you want to go ahead.
I honestly wonder how accurate that statistic is, and not necessarily for the reason that most people might think. I was I was trying to find the right article in a medical story. This was like months ago. And I ended up reading part of this article about this woman who did not find out that she was intersex until after she had given birth to multiple children. So this is someone who was assigned female at birth, identified as a woman, started having some weird health thing happen. Doctors started running tests. Oh, it turns out you technically qualify as being intersex. So, it's one of those things where it makes me curious how often that happens. But I think a lot of what is important about that conversation is that bodies are already incredibly, incredibly complicated.
there is so much variation, even if you are focusing on people who truly do fit within one of the two binary sex categories.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much variation within those bodies.
Yes.
So much variation. Your video went out.
I just saw that. Let me get that back on. We'll keep chatting until it comes back on here.
But it's one of those things where it's like trans people's bodies do not fall outside of that variation.
No.
Another thing that I really don't think people understand is for one thing, the ways in which hormones can impact bodies, but also that. So being trans is really fucking hard, right?
Yes.
That becomes a roadblock to doing things like participating in sports.
Yep.
If you're dealing with depression because your family is constantly dead naming you, it's going to be a lot harder for you to make it to soccer practice and perform well in soccer practice.
Sure is.
So it's one of those things where, like, when it comes to the immediate now, I really don't see any reason why we shouldn't just try including trans people of all ages on the team that they actually fall in line with as far as their gender identity is concerned.
Yeah.
There's no reason to not at this point.
Exactly. Isn't. And the thing is people like to refer to trans youth and trans adult as something that is happen or a choice that is made. But the point is there are so many people who are intersex, who are literally genetically intersex, who are anatomically intersex, or who are born with ambiguous genitalia, that
hormonal levels alone can qualify you as being intersex.
Exactly. Yeah, just hormone levels alone. Period.
Which to me speaks to the fragility of binary sex categories, is that they're actually pretty flimsy to begin with because they don't even take intersex people into account.
Literally.
So to base all of sport on something that more and more scientists are speaking up and saying is out of date and doesn't take into account the reality of human diversity.
Yep.
Why are we still basing our sports on this?
Literally. I'm actually in a course right now, which is a super dope course. It's called it's not called trans anything. It's called Queer Eco Spiritualities. It's a theology course linking together queer theology and eco-conscious theology. And there's it's amazing. I'm going to wall out on this one day towards the end of the semester when I'm not still writing essays about it. I'm going to break it all down for you. But basically, we're starting with the understanding of queer theology. We're talking about eco-conscious theology, and we're linking the two together because actually nature is quite queer. And people can fight me if they want. I will drop the articles and the scientists and the page numbers. But literally, there's over 23,000 species of creatures that are queer. And I'm not just talking about engaging in same-sex copulation. I'm talking about an actual gender. There is gender divergence. There is gender variance. There is gender fluidity. There is same-sex procreation. There's alternate social and hierarchical structures that just completely shatter the idea that anything about life was supposed to be male or female or heterosexual. Over 23,000 species, bro. Like, that's nuts. And so we come to this conversation about sport and people all of a sudden are like, whoa, that's not natural, but it is.
Yeah. I think crazy. Another thing with the sport conversation that's really important is when I see a lot of people bringing up questions of fairness, I don't think they realize this, but they are only thinking about what is fair for cis people. They're not thinking about what is fair for trans people.
Absolutely.
And that's really, really important. It's like when we talk about fairness for everyone, you have to include everyone in that conversation, in that thought process, which means including trans people.
Exactly.
And saying like, oh, well, this is what is fair for me.
Yep.
That's awesome. But what about everyone else who's in the world?
Exactly. And, when you look at trans women, particularly Black and brown trans women, I did a reading for a Trans Day of Remembrance service this year. And I just read the names of the trans people who were murdered around the world last year, just in one calendar year, it
Yeah.
took me 46 minutes to just read the name and the date that these people passed away. Just that. So if, 5 seconds on each person. It took me 45 minutes.
Yep.
So when you want to talk about being fair, let's talk about what we're doing to trans people by consistently othering them. Like, trans people are already marginalized, and you are further marginalizing them, because you're not going to put a trans woman on a men's basketball team because everyone's going to laugh, but you're not going to put a trans woman on a women's basketball team because why? You know what I mean? We're not
Yeah, no,
talking about,
absolutely.
when we're talking about professional sport, that's a different conversation. And frankly, there's even less ground there, because professional sport is a business. And when you sign on to professional sport, you are not only an active participant, you're a commodity, and you're doing things by that system. There's no overarching moral guideline to sport. Like you said, simply hormone levels can make you not qualify. Like, there are instances of assigned female at birth participating in female sport athletes who had to lower their naturally occurring testosterone to compete in sport. So when we're at that level, that's a decision you're making. And frankly, if we want to talk about MMA fighters crushing someone else's skull, you signed up to be an MMA fighter. Like,
and when it comes to MMA fighters, there's weight classes.
Exactly.
So you're not going to have a petite 5-foot person fighting against someone who's 6'4" anyway.
Exactly.
But I had a thought and I lost it.
Oh, that's okay. I think when we're talking about fully formed adults and participation in sport, like I keep trying to emphasize over and over again, there are so many hormone levels that you have to meet, even as a college athlete. Like, I couldn't eat, like there was things I couldn't eat because I couldn't have it in my system and still legally play. So professional sport is one thing. When we're talking about high school sports, it's a whole different story. And I think
It
that
really is.
do you know anything offhand? Justin did ask a question here. He asked, "Do we know any stats on trans participation in sports at the high school level?" I don't know any off the top of my head. I think that something that's really important to remember when talking about this whole trans conversation is that trans and non-binary people are not counted in any census data. LGBTQ people, like gay and lesbian people, are barely counted in any census data. In fact, that's one of the insidious moves that Trump made during his during his presidency, was that he intended to and was able to remove LGBTQ data from the census. And as anyone who's worked in nonprofit work knows, there's no funding without data. So what essentially happened was just an erasure of LGBTQ people. In the way that certain races are erased by medical forms and census forms. So there's, I will take a look at that, Justin, particularly for you. We'll try to pull up some actual good resources there, but it's important to note that the data can be hard to find, especially at high school age, because you're dealing with folks that might be minors. So.
Yeah, and the other thing with high school is that you have to assume that the person would be comfortable marking off their actual identity on a form, which at a high school level is just not always the case.
Yeah.
I would say that one of the things that would be key in helping a student, I guess trans kids be more comfortable with coming out at that age would actually be taking into account all school activities and how do we let our kids engage with these.
Yeah.
If you know that your school, if you try to find out and you find out that your school has no idea how they're going to deal with a trans student who wants to play sports, and playing soccer is the best part of your school year, you're going to stop and think about if you really want to potentially give up soccer for the sake of coming out, because it's the only good thing in your school year, right? So when it comes to trans people participating in sports, it's not, to me, it's actually not about, like, when you're talking about like high school level, that kind of thing, to me, it's not really necessarily about fairness within the sport. It's about the social ramifications of not allowing trans people to participate on what is actually the appropriate team based on their gender.
Yeah,
You are
absolutely.
isolating people. You are, so, there's, to kind of draw a comparison, there's a trend in Hollywood to cast a cis man to play a trans woman, right? Now, one of the things that does is undermine the idea that a trans woman is actually a woman.
Yes.
When you look at the character on the screen, you're looking at a cis man dressed up as a woman. And when that actor is doing an interview about the movie, they're presenting themselves as a man, and that makes their character's womanhood seem like a costume because it is.
Exactly.
And in reality, trans people are living this 24/7.
Yes.
So there's a similar social ramification to forcing trans people to play on the team that matches with the gender they were assigned at birth.
Absolutely.
You're sending a message to everyone around them that their actual gender is not actually their gender.
Exactly. It's absolutely, yeah. Gender becomes something that's performative, which, if we really want to go all queer theory, gender is drag in general, but I'm not going to try to take it to that level right now, so we'll stick here. Justin brought up a great point. Justin's my dude, in case you haven't noticed. We chat all the time about stuff like this, but he was saying that he firmly believes that it's a conservative scare tactic to talk about trans people in sport at the high school level, because they're talking about something that is overwhelmingly rare, and is not really, at this point, to be honest, given our methods of gathering data, I would almost venture to say it's not statistically significant. It's a scare tactic, much like bathrooms. And so it's a conservative thing where they're like, let's take this obscure thing that we really don't even have data on, and let's like scare people about it, when in reality, if you want to talk about trans people, some of the statistics that we do have indicate that trans people are infinitely more likely to be a victim of a violent act than to be a perpetrator of a violent act. And I think that's a big thing that's the case with trans kids in sports. And I think another thing, just like the bathrooms, Justin, just like the bathrooms, it's not terrifying. Your gender, your bathroom at home is non-binary. Get scared. Go put a sign up on your bathroom at home, man.
Also, like, bathroom stalls, not to dwell on this, bathroom stalls in America are built so poorly. Like, you see photos of bathroom stalls from many countries in Europe, and it's like the door doesn't have like half-inch gaps on each side. It's actually an appropriate height and length. Like, that is a design flaw in American bathrooms that is not the fault of trans people, and we should still be able to pee safely.
Yes, Justin just said, plus public bathrooms are scary in general. You should avoid them. I agree. At this point, they're terrifying. You know what I mean? And it's just a scare tactic. It's just something that we can throw on the fire. It's a non-issue or a less existing issue, and it's being used to be divisive. And I think that's why I want to put this conversation out there, is basically to call bullshit. Like, I want to call bullshit. I'm going to hit you with some facts. Owen's going to hit you with some facts. We're going to talk about some real scientific details, and we're going to take the steam out of this argument, because it's not an argument. It's a pawn. It's an incendiary device that people are trying to place. I think another thing that's important when we're talking about trans kids participating in sport, particularly at the high school level, is we've got to talk about hormones, because hormones, everybody in high school is at a different stage in development. That's just the nature of high school. And there's so much happening and so much fluctuating. Like, we've all seen the kid, the sixth grader who has a mustache, right? And we're trying to play sport, trying to play basketball with this kid. Like, this is not okay. You know what I mean? There are people who develop, or we as people all develop our secondary sex characteristics, and we go through puberty at our own rates. And so you could already have someone who has more testosterone playing on the same team as someone who has less. What we're really talking about when we talk about trans kids playing sports is we're talking about their genitals, and it's really creepy to me that we're talking about the genitals of our children. Like, that's strange.
I think that's something that trans people go back to a lot for good reason. It's like, when it gets down to it, what you are worried about is what's in my pants, and I don't understand how that's any of your business.
Yeah,
Like,
it just gets like I really like to play it like this because a lot of this has happened to me and my partner a lot. People will come up to Ella and they'll be like, "So did Leo have the surgery?" And we would both get annoyed with it at first. And you know, when I was first coming out, we were working on our own stuff, and it'd be a little triggering. But at the point we're at right now, first of all, she's a baddie. Let me tell you, you don't want to come up against a Puerto Rican woman. But the thing is she'll be like, "So." How's your husband's penis? You know, she'll just put it right back in
Mm-hmm.
their court in that language. The thing behind the
Yeah.
thing is like they're
Yeah.
the thing is, did Leo have the surgery? The thing behind the thing is
Yeah.
what's in Leo's pants and how do they use it? Which is
Yeah.
weird, bro.
Yeah. 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 It's one of those like, yeah, a lot of those kinds of things. It could also be what positions do you enjoy? You know,
Exactly.
like, because how do you have sex is a weirdly common question that's thrown at trans people, both directly and indirectly. And it's just like, do I get to interrogate you about this back, or is this a one-way street? Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, like I am not public property, much less my genitals are not public property.
Mm-hmm.
And I just can't, like, particularly when we're having this conversation about high school kids playing sports. Why are you talking
Yeah.
about their genitals? That's so weird. So
Yeah.
you're either
Yeah. And
creepily obsessed with genitals or there's
yeah.
something else going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another thing that's important to mention with trans high schoolers is that it's very rare for a minor to go directly onto testosterone or estrogen. It is much more common for them to go onto hormone blockers. Mm-hmm. What blockers do is they basically put a pause button on puberty. Mm-hmm. So, you know, kids who come out at like the age of like 5 or 8, something like that, if their parents are supportive and take them to an endocrinologist, that's usually what the endocrinologist does. This is done for a few reasons. One reason is that when you put the pause button on puberty, for someone who was assigned female at birth, you might be able to avoid them developing a larger chest size altogether. Mm-hmm. Then they don't need to get top surgery at all. They can just kind of skip that part. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it does things like that can make things more comfortable for this trans kid while they're getting to adulthood. The other reason it's done is because if you go off hormone blockers and don't start taking anything else, you go through puberty like normal, mm-hmm. exactly as your body would have had you do, just maybe a little bit later than your body would have started it. Absolutely. So it also creates room for these kids to really think through their decisions and all that kind of stuff. Now, absolutely. I would argue that like 9.99 times out of 10, no one is going to get to the point of going on hormone blockers without having already thought through their decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really important thing to point out. There's so much there that's important. So thank you for bringing it up, because I don't think a lot of people know about blockers. And like the thing about hormone blockers is like, if I had hormone blockers when I was younger, which I lacked the context to understand my gender and orientation when I was younger because of the context I grew up in. So for me, this is not, you know, a foolproof example, but say I had understood my gender earlier and I had taken hormone blockers, I would have never had to have such an invasive procedure as a double mastectomy. Now, I am incredibly grateful that I had top surgery. I am actually very proud of my scars because I don't want to appear cisgendered. But like I wouldn't have necessarily had to have that invasive surgery, which bears with it a cost, and it bears with it health ramifications, and it bears with it, you know, all sorts of things. Like, and I could have avoided that if I had been able to go on blockers. I think another thing that's important to talk about when it comes to avoiding surgery or top surgery specifically is you also avoid binding. Yeah. Yes. So for people who don't know what that is, binding is when you wear something that compresses your chest so that it appears to be flat, even though it is not. Mm-hmm. I wore a binder for 6 years and have walked out of it with chronic back pain issues. Yep. 6 years. That's really not that long, I promise. Yep. It's also something where, like, if you are wearing a binder, you cannot do, or you're not supposed to do, a certain extent of physical labor, whether that's working out or doing your job. Yes. I know multiple trans folks who have gotten fractures in their ribs because their job was working at a warehouse. Yep.
they have to wear a binder for safety reasons to not
Yes.
out themselves to their coworkers.
Yes.
So now they're wearing a binder while working at a warehouse, and it's like, why does my rib hurt? I know why.
Right.
It's probably a stress fracture.
Yeah.
So even when it comes to like hormone blockers help you avoid that, as well as avoiding top surgery. But when it comes to top surgery, that is actually part of why it's really important.
Yeah.
Is because binding has more negative effects on your body long term than top surgery does.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are overarching health concerns attached to all of this. I mean, even if you want to talk about say someone's transmasculine and they don't get the appropriate like medical advice and stuff, like a lot of transmasculine folks will not go see a gynecologist. And that's troublesome because like I'm not a woman, but I got some woman parts, and so there's these health risks and there's this disjointedness that happens when we don't just freaking talk about it and let trans people live. You know what I mean? Like there's so many ramifications to it, especially when you're talking about trans kids. I mean, when you're talking about trans kids, you also have to have the conversation of, is their family open and affirming? Like, are we talking about their mental health? There's so many things at stake.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest health risks for trans people personally is the absolute lack of research on trans bodies. Something that's important to state with this to me is that this also very much applies to intersex people. I mean, it also applies to many communities of color. The normal person in American medical science is a certain amount of skinny, white, cisgender, heterosexual, but in trans people's cases, it plays out in a lot of different ways. So like I have asthma, right? And every time I do a like peak lung flow test where you go into the tube, what my doctor does is pulls up the chart that says a woman's lung capacity should be in this range and a man should be in that range, and then averages it together. Because I started hormones early enough that my feet grew a little bit, like that kind of thing. So it could have impacted my lung capacity, but we don't know if going on hormones can impact lung capacity because no one's ever taken the time to study it.
Exactly.
Enough studies have been done to know that there are no disastrous effects, but there's a massive gap when it comes to actually being able to manage health concerns that trans people have, like everyone else.
Yes.
Just because the research hasn't been done yet.
And the research can't be done if there's no statistical data about people existing. And if you don't let trans children play sports, that's another step to our erasure. Like it all flows together. And it might seem like we're talking about this and this and this and this, but that's because it's all the same thing, right? It's like I read a study about like car safety, right? And the average crash test dummy was like, a 5'9" Caucasian skeleton, because there are skeletal differences across like ethnicities, that's not racist. That's just like there's a thing. Bodies are diverse across all sorts of boundaries. It's why there's no binary. But like if there's no representation, if there's no testing, there's no acknowledgement, there's no treatment, like there's this whole systemic fallout. And allowing people to just play freaking sports if they want to, while it might seem small and it is statistically insignificant, it's not insignificant, overall philosophically.
Socially.
Absolutely.
Socially, that stuff is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just so important. And I think a lot of things, especially when it comes to sport, is that people don't realize I got into it, man, and I don't get into it on Facebook. Like I just don't, because no one comes to Facebook to have their mind changed. It's like not a thing. But I got into it with some really turfy people the other day. Now, conversation pause. TERF stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, for those of you who don't know. And there is a movement of people of just people who don't want to acknowledge that trans women are women and don't want to admit them or allow them space in any conversation that's centered around femininity. And so I got into this conversation with the other day of a woman who just literally go ahead.
I also want to clarify that TERF is not, in fact, a slur. which is something that I've seen people saying on the internet.
Not a slur.
Not recently. It is not a slur. Like Leo said, trans exclusionary radical feminist, it is literally just an abbreviation for saying this is someone who calls himself a feminist but does not like trans women. Really, trans people generally. Trans women are seen as men who are masquerading as women for the sake of threatening real women. Trans men and anyone who's AFAB, who's trans, is seen as a betrayer of womanhood. So TERFs really just kind of hate all trans people. They definitely attack trans women by far the most.
Absolutely. And it's not a slur. It's not a slur. It's not a slur. It's just an identifier. Not that Owen and I have like encountered conversations about this ever in our lives, but there are categories of people, and I hate to out our community like this, but there is even categories within the LGBTQ community that have adopted patriarchal and binary hierarchy. Like, just because you're gay doesn't mean you're immediately open-minded. You can see that in terms of like rainbow capitalism, where pride events become more about selling and buying and slapping a rainbow on something that will actually do nothing to help the community. You can see that in spaces where cisgendered white men, albeit gay, are still considered to be the default voice of the LGBTQ community. Like, that's one of the things about Disclosure that was so good, was that it was Black trans women talking,
like there is a ton of racism within the entire LGBTQ community.
Absolutely.
There's a ton of transphobia amongst the cisgender portion of the LGBTQ folk.
It's a thing.
So there are massive issues that we have to grapple with, which also, like any white, queer, and trans people out there, part of queer people being invested in decolonization is queer people being invested in anti-racism. By default, it to me is a requirement of being queer.
Yes. You cannot, if you are queer and racist, get the hell out. Like, you're
not queer anymore. You're gay. For me, I use gay and queer very differently. There's the gays who are more normative, more focused on assimilating into culture instead of disrupting it and changing it for the better for everyone. Like that kind of thing. So I use gay and queer very differently. If you are a racist queer, you are not queer. You are now in the gay category.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say that all gays are racist. Like, because some people really are like binary, like identify as what they were assigned as birth and prescribe to the current social, norms. So, like, say you were assigned male, you feel male, you identify as male, but that's not necessarily the problem. The problem is in your orientation of thinking, because queer tends to imply a breaking down of binaries. So you can subscribe to the current binary definition of male. Queer. You can be a gay queer.
I know people who are gay and are part of the queer community. And I know people who identify as queer and are part of the gay community, which is a complicated thing about how I use those words, which I should also acknowledge. I'm very used to it.
Right.
But it's like there's lowercase queer and gay, which are an individual's identities, and then there's the capital G gay community and capital Q queer community, which is where the differences I was talking about come in play. You can be gay and believe all kinds of different things.
Absolutely. And it doesn't make you immune. And I want to draw this parallel, and not saying that I'm speaking from my own experience, but speaking from proximity. There's also been studies and stuff done on how there's a lot of patriarchy within African-American communities. Not that that's exclusionary to them, you know what I mean? But there's just because you're marginalized doesn't mean that you instantly understand intersectionality. Like Natalie just pointed out on our feed, she said, it's so confusing to me that people who are already marginalized are so quick to further marginalize others. And I don't see, that's what I don't understand, especially about women. Hi Kitty, how are you?
This is my naked cat. Her name is Roxy.
Hi Roxy.
She interrupts me when I'm on video call.
Of course, so do my animals. It's totally chill. She's also super cute, and I want a naked cat.
Thank you.
But
my favorite.
I love it. Yeah, there's so many instances in which marginalized people then perpetuate marginalization. And so, if you really want to be truly queer or truly open or truly progressive, you need to dismantle the system that creates the oppression. It's not enough for women to have rights. Yo, let me tell you this. Let me hit you with this. Susan B. Anthony, right? Women's right to vote, right? Susan B. Anthony is quoted as saying, this is a paraphrase, but this is the gist of her quote in like current language vernacular, right? If you have to choose between white women and black women to give them the right to vote, you should choose white women because they're smarter. Susan B. Anthony said that. So she's like taking her marginalization and perpetuating it. There has to, in my mind, there has to be a way to move forward to freedom. That doesn't also continue to subjugate others. And that I don't know. How do we do that?
It also to me speaks to a trend that we're seeing continue in a way that's targeted at trans people now, right? Which is like in the early days of modern feminism, white women were only fighting for white women.
Yes.
And arguably not even poor white women.
Yep.
They were only fighting for middle and upper class white women, right?
Yep.
And we see this kind of thing continue where it's like, I'm going to fight for myself while specifically trying to keep you down. I mean, Irish people assimilated into whiteness. And a way that Irish Americans specifically did that was participating in anti-Black racism. That was how Irish Americans bought their ticket into whiteness, right? So when I see people who are feminists except for trans women, to me, it's a continuation of this cycle of we have to keep the door kind of closed. And I think that gets into a lot of stuff, honestly, that to me is somewhat rooted in capitalism.
Yeah.
Because capitalism puts a lot of weight on being successful, right? And capitalism has a specific definition of what that looks like. And it includes having more than other people. So if you enable everyone to have access to everything, you are now lowering your own chances of being successful under capitalism.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's a scarcity mentality. And what's crazy is that we made it. Like humans made it. It's a thing that is created. Like more equality for Owen doesn't mean less equality for Leo. Like that's just absolutely crazy. We've created this environment of scarcity and then we're doing stuff based off of that. Like we're doing shit based off that. That's so mind-blowing and reductionary to me because it leads to exactly what you said, a cycle of repeating and perpetual marginalization. And so what you see a lot now and what led us on this whole tangent anyways was I was having a conversation with a cisgender woman who said she was a feminist, and I guess she was a feminist and not a womanist because womanist is a movement that makes space for Black women and is not taken over by the pink hats. You know what I mean? The march in Washington, D.C. That everybody was so stoked on was primarily run by white women, but it was a ripoff of an idea that was run by Black women. And it didn't get as much coverage because it was Black women, but the Black women did the work. And so what we see now is I'm having all of this socially and ideologically and theologically and philosophically leads to a place where I'm having a conversation with someone who is assigned female at birth and they're advocating for the exclusion of a trans female in sport. You know what that translates down to? If you break that down, that means someone in this area, in the town that I grew up in, there is a lonely, unsupported trans girl who just wants to play a sport. And you said no, because you have the wrong genitalia?
Yeah, which isn't, I saw a post about this recently, and it does come to mind for me pretty frequently when in a conversation with someone who does identify themselves as a feminist but does not support trans people. At a certain point, trans exclusionary feminism is once again saying that women are walking vaginas and men are walking penises.
Yes, it is.
So we're kind of going in a circle in that case, because feminism started out being rooted in, biology to an extent, but it was about celebrating the limitations of that biology, and then it was about there not being limitations because all of the biological stuff is bullshit. And now some people are getting to this point of like, no, but the biological stuff is real though, for the sake of excluding trans people. But when it comes to talking about cis women versus cis men, it doesn't, the biology doesn't matter anymore. Which is a lot of mental hoops to me, but I
A
don't
lot.
think people really sit down to consider
Right.
that if you're excluding trans women simply because of their assigned gender at birth and what their body looks like, you're once again reducing gender to genitalia.
Yes. And you're again, see, there's this whole system in play that, and I've been reading about this. I read a lot generally, but like I read a shit ton now for school. But I was reading about kind of the development of the early church and the development of Christian thought. And in the beginning, we're talking about a little bit about like Greek philosophers and stuff. And there was actually a school of thought that comes from the ancient world where that like women were just defective men. And they were just men who failed to like actualize, and there's this kind of system of development, and you can see it, and you can see the footprints of it, or the the scraps of it throughout history. And the idea is that we're going to define everything around male experience, right? We are centering the patriarchy and males and male experience in the middle, and everything revolves around that. So if you're going to be a trans exclusionary feminist, you are once again basically centering the masculine experience by saying like, that's nope, penis, nope, testosterone, nope. Like you have to actually break down the binary. Now this is like the queer in me, but you have to actually break down the binary if you're going to create equality. And you cannot break down a binary by saying, bro, you got a penis, you can't play women's sports. Like, that's crazy. It's reinforcing that binary and that patriarchy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Natalie came back on. I know you and I have said this, but Natalie's echoing it once again, and I feel like I could say it every 3 minutes and it would still be impactful. You're talking about genitalia again.
Yeah.
Like, people don't realize that that's what their logical base level is, right? Because what are people actually worried about? Like, what is the actual worry about trans women playing sports? They might have long limbs. They might have more testosterone. They might be more aggressive. But here's the thing, especially in sport, the people that succeed in sport and that continue to succeed in sport are already genetic outliers. Their limbs are already longer by nature. Like, even female basketball players, if you take a measurement of someone's length of their arm, or you can also look at like how far, when someone's standing up, if you look at how far from it is from their shoulder to their knee, and how much of that space is covered by their arm, the average point guard has a wingspan that's 1 to 2 to 3 inches wider than that typical proportion would be. Right? So their hands already automatically come down close to their kneecaps. Therefore, their wingspan is already longer. Guess what? That's probably why they made it a little further. When you look at Pele, the Brazilian like soccer god that he was, one of the reasons that Pele was so good, aside from natural talent, was he had an amazingly low resting heart rate. His resting heart rate was half of what the average person's resting heart rate was. So when he was running, he was having the same heart rate that I'm having while I'm sitting there eating potato chips. That's part of why he made it. So when we're talking about trans people in sport, if you reduce it to a genitalia conversation, you've missed the whole point. Not everybody is going to succeed in sport, and that sucks, bro. Like, I run like a duck and I have asthma. I wanted to play pro sports. Guess what? My genetics outed me on that path. I couldn't work hard enough to overcome it. So like we're already talking about genetic outliers, and we're talking about participation, and we're talking about hormones, and you're trying to bring in genitals of kids, of minors. Why so many people talking about the genitals of minors?
Yeah.
I was a whole rant on my part. I am sorry, but
no, I'm feeling you, man. I'm with you on that. It's a frustrating thing, I think that most trans people, we have already had to do the work of undoing what the world has taught us about ourselves, validating ourselves, and learning to love ourselves, right? So that, I think, is a pain point when these kinds of conversations come up, right? It's like, okay, so I am once again, someone is asking me to validate my existence, explain why I still do, it's like, this is already something that I've devoted a lot of my time and energy to.
Yes.
And like, I would say less as time goes on, because it's, getting top surgery was a game changer for me.
Right.
I feel like I was settling into my body. Tattoos also, honestly, have been huge for me with that. But it's, it's one of those things where it's like we are already doing that process for ourselves.
Yes.
And also end up doing the same process for so many other people in our lives.
Yes.
It's not that the education isn't important.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't want to educate people. I honestly love engaging with education when I have the capacity for it.
Yes.
I just don't always have the capacity
Yes.
for those conversations.
To continue to validate myself externally when I've already gone through the process of working to validate myself internally is very, very tiring, and we can't continue to do that. Like, it's not acceptable. I mean, as Natalie pointed out here on our feed too, like there was a time where people subscribe to this psychological concept and the vestiges of it are still there. But Freud basically thought that the root of a lot of women's mental problems because they didn't have a penis, and so they felt inadequate and not whole. So there's a psychological orientation around this, heterosexual cisgender norming. Like trans people are already fighting through a society that has these underpinnings. There is not one high school assigned male at birth human that's like, I could get a scholarship if I was a girl. That's the other thing about trans too, is I think particularly why we're talking about trans women. First of all, apparently people don't give a crap about trans men maybe getting pummeled. They don't care. But when it comes to trans women, they're really worried that people are going to transition just to abuse children in bathrooms or to play sports. But the thing is that to be a trans woman in America, I personally believe that it's probably the hardest road to walk, to be a trans woman in America, specifically a Black trans woman, because our society is still patriarchal. Fight me on that. We could go, but our society is patriarchally oriented. And what that means is our society still values the male. So when you transition from assigned male at birth to female, you are transgressing the binary. You are taking off male privilege, and you are taking on stigma and shame that is layered and layered and layered and layered in our history. No one does that for a scholarship. No one does that for the bathroom.
I mean, every time someone, pulls that up either as a hypothetical or does well, I'm just going to go say I'm a woman so I can do this. Ha ha ha. I'm like, okay, so why don't you actually try doing that and see what the fuck happens? Because it's not going to be a pleasant experience 9 times out of 10. No. You're going to have a bad time.
Yep.
Okay, so you think kids are going to start saying they're trans just to get scholarships?
Yep.
How do you think that conversation is going to go down with their family?
Exactly.
It just does not actually make sense when you take into account that life is hard for trans people simply on the fact that we're trans.
Yep. There's a pastor in my town right now that is making live videos left and right saying that he's going to get a couple of guys together and put on dresses and go play women's volleyball. And I want to be like, bro, first of all, you're crazy. Like, get off this shit. The Bible doesn't say anything that backs up what you're saying. But second of all, that's not actually trans. Okay. That's not actually trans. Let's be clear about that. But second of all, let's say magically that you could fit your bald ass head in a dress and pass for a female. I have some feelings in case you can't tell. But let's say magically that you could pass as female with that busted face. Let me see how the police treat you.
Yeah.
Let me see how
that's, but that's the other thing, right? It's like this idea of passing is really unfair to begin with.
Yes.
I mean, folks who are trans and are AFAB, honestly, just to be completely real about it, have a much easier time with passing.
Yes.
Than someone who is a trans woman or otherwise assigned male and presenting in a more feminine way.
AFAB equals assigned female at birth, in case anybody missed that. So AFAB is assigned female at birth. It's just an easier way to saying all those words. So, but yes, so go keep going.
Oh, and also, just in case anyone is curious about this, the reason I say assigned blank at birth instead of just saying male or female is because of the whole biological sex is actually super complicated. And these two categories don't take into account intersex existence. It's also because my body no longer fits into a female category, and because I never was actually a woman.
I've always been striving to do my own thing with my gender, but didn't absolutely not have the language for it as a kid, nor did I have the space to experiment with it. But like, it's one of those things where reflecting back, I can see that it was on my mind in some ways, just
Mm-hmm.
not, as clearly articulated as I can articulate it now, not as
Exactly.
well as expressed as I can express it now.
Exactly.
But yeah, so like passing is another really, really unfair thing that is put on trans people,
It
especially
is.
trans women.
Yep.
Trans masculine folks, like I have a little bit of an Adam's apple, just from being on hormones, like that kind of thing. But for folks who are, who are AMAB, you start looking at, in some cases, folks want facial feminization. That is an expensive surgery.
Very much so.
Someone who has a really prominent Adam's apple might want to shave that down. That's also really expensive.
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff is not taken care of by hormones.
No.
Hormones only do so much, and surgeries only do so much. So honestly, like, and this is kind of a tangent from what you were talking about, but
Yeah.
like, expecting trans people to pass is frankly bullshit.
It is totally bullshit because gender is performative. Gender is drag. It's a thing. Gender is a social construct. 125 million% fight me on it, bro. Fight me on it. Gender is a social construct, and you are. No one is under any authority or pressure to have to perform the way society says you should have to perform. Right? It's not a thing. And that includes trans women who can be fully female and look however the hell they want. Like that's a thing because to be passing is simply another phrase to like fit into the mold that your society has given you. Because
it's about norms.
Yeah, it's about norms.
Maintaining norms.
Yep.
There are trans women who continue to have big, beautiful beards with a, wonderful bit of eyeshadow above it. I've never been a makeup person, but like that kind of thing where it's like even a beard is not actually inherently masculine.
Yep. There are plenty of
feminine way.
Yeah, there are plenty of women who, were they not kind of cloistered or pressured by their society, they would naturally grow facial hair. That's a thing. Like I remember thinking that if I had polycystic ovarian syndrome, I think that's how you say it. It can affect your hormone levels, and it plays out for a lot of females in a lot of different ways. But one of the things is it can cause excess, or it can cause unwanted facial hair. And so I remember thinking like, if I had only had PCOS, I could have had unwanted facial hair, which is privilege, and I admit it. But it was just one of those things in that moment where I was just like, I want a beard, And thank goodness I got good beard genes because I can have one now. I actually just trimmed mine down, but these are things that are it's a social determinant. There are cultures where men wear skirts, and that's not weird. There are, you know what I mean? There was, I think it was Puerto Ricans that were matrilineal, which from my friend who is Puerto Rican, so I'll play off her. But from my understanding in traditional like Taino culture, the women chose who they would sleep with. They would have babies, and then the women and men would be like, boop, bye. You know what I mean? So even gender roles and how gender functions in society is determined by your society. And so no trans person should feel that they have to fit any given role. They just shouldn't. And if you're making them feel that way, you're a dick. It's so true. And let's talk about secondary sex characteristics for a minute, because I do believe that I think that's one of the things that makes it harder for trans females or people who are assigned male at birth to appear differently, because it's not something that one surgery does. I think this is also a common thing that people don't necessarily realize about being trans or non-binary. People would ask me all the time, have you had the surgery? Well, like, what do you fucking mean? Did I have my tonsils out? Like, what are you talking about? 9 times out of 10, yet again, they're talking about my genitals. But there's no one surgery that just masculinizes your entire body, much like there is no one surgery that feminizes your entire body. And the secondary sex characteristics brought on by testosterone are much more noticeable and much harder to alter.
More permanent.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
Much more permanent, actually, and not in all cases, but in many cases. So, like, if you are AFAB and start out with, naturally higher estrogen levels, when you go on testosterone, your voice will drop. and you'll develop an Adam's apple.
Mm-hmm.
If you are AMAB with naturally high testosterone levels, then you increase your estrogen levels, your voice doesn't change at all.
Mm-hmm.
It does not get higher again. Once your voice drops, it's dropped.
It's
That's
dropped.
that.
Yep. It doesn't change.
So,
those are immutable traits.
Yeah. So another thing that I think is important related to what you brought up is that transitioning takes time.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have sometimes that when a trans person comes out, it's going to be like flipping a switch.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to go from appearing as the gender they were assigned at birth to appearing as the gender they identify with overnight.
Yeah.
First of all, like hair takes time to grow just on a basic level.
Yeah.
Someone's trying to grow their hair out. But I mean, when I started hormones, it took years for people to consistently gender me differently.
Mm-hmm.
It took years of being on hormones for it to change from a default she, her pronoun.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way to do it any faster than I was doing it. That's
Mm-hmm.
just how much time it takes.
Yep.
Now, when it comes to surgery, I started pursuing surgery in 2012 and wasn't able to get it until 2018, which honestly was remarkably fast.
Yeah.
Compared to how long it takes a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it still took 6 years.
Yep.
So like this stuff takes time. It
Yes.
takes a lot of time, and folks need room to embrace that process and grow with it and change with it. Because trust me, like trans folks already want it to move faster.
Yeah, we already want it to be a magic, like a panacea, a cure-all, but that's just not what happens. So,
Yeah.
and we should also note that just as second puberty for trans people takes time, first puberty takes time, and so this is yet another area when you circle back around to teenagers, specifically teenagers in sport, like you just can't be like hard and fast, like penis male, vagina female. Like that just doesn't make any sense, because everybody's bodies are changing at that point, whether they're trans or not. And if you want to keep a level playing field for high school sports, maybe everyone needs to be on hormone blockers, because that dude, like I said before, that kid with a mustache in 6th grade, bro. Tell me his testosterone levels are the same as the kid whose voice is still squeaking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And once again, I'm being male centric in this because I'm assuming people are talking about testosterone levels, because no one's worried about estrogen levels. But really, estrogen levels can affect your bone density, your muscle recovery time. Like all of these things are affected by hormones. And it's important to also note, I think this is really, really basic endocrinology, but everybody has estrogen and testosterone in their body. And this goes back to our initial conversation about hormone levels and chemical levels that are all tested in athletes.
Brief backtrack. I do want to make sure to mention that not every trans person wants to go on hormones or wants to get any surgeries, and that's also an extremely valid decision.
Absolutely.
Related to that, there are actually a ton of trans people who carry children.
Yeah.
Several years ago now, there was like the first pregnant man. He was not the first pregnant man.
No,
he was
not
the first publicly pregnant man.
Yeah.
And there have been many before. There have been even more since.
Yep.
So that's something where something that I think is really beautiful about transness is this kind of reinvention of how we engage with our bodies and how we look at different things.
Yeah.
So, for someone who identifies as a man who is carrying a child, part of what a lot of those folks are doing is reclaiming is the wrong word, but I guess claiming being a caregiver as being a part of their masculinity, right? And not in a bringing home the bacon sense, but in a literally carrying a child in their belly for months, and that is a beautiful thing to see brought into masculinity, which is so frequently seen as being like a certain amount of cold in a way, like when you're looking at stereotypes.
Yeah.
To see these folks who are nurturing an infant in their belly and chest feeding them and cradling them.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's a wonderful, very feminist way to subvert a lot of norms that we have in our society.
Absolutely. My friend Reno, he was a stay-at-home dad for a while, and people used to always be like, "Oh, it's cute that you're spending time with your kids." And he's like, "It's not cute. They're my kids." Like we have some messed up norms if we think that that is cute or cool or different. Like it is obvious that the world not only should tolerate trans people, but y'all need us, okay? Y'all need us to help unfuck a couple things in society. Like you not only need to tolerate us, bro, you need to celebrate us, because we're like a giant mirror that in living our own truths, you can see that some of the truths you held to be so self-evident are incredibly messed up, you know, incredibly.
And truths that may be stopping you from doing something you want to do.
Yeah, for yourself, even if you're cis.
Yeah. Like I really think the vast majority of people in this country, if they reflected on their childhood, could remember at least one time and they're like, oh, I want to do that thing, but that thing is for boys/girls, and that's not me. Right? And part of what transness is about softening those boundaries. What is your femininity? What is your masculinity?
Yes.
Which starts to touch on something else, which is that cis people have as much of a gender identity as trans people do.
Yes, they do.
No one's gender identity is inherently a part of them any more than anyone else's.
Yes.
So that's something that I could write a book about.
You probably should, because it's much the same with orientation. As I mentioned before, 23,000 queer species. So your heterosexuality is as much of a choice as my homosexuality is. And I guarantee you, if you walked up to a bunch of heterosexual people and be like, tell me about your identity, they're gonna be like, what? Like we just are straight, but that's a choice. That's been cultured into you. You've been made to believe that, and we've been made to treat our bodies in a certain way and to engage with the world in a certain way, and none of that is inherent, and you get to choose. That's the beautiful part about being queer, is you get to choose. This made me think of one other thing too, which is the idea of embodiment and being in our bodies, because a lot of times being in our bodies is a difficult experience for a lot of people, regardless of gender identity. I was at a store the other day and I saw this book called Being in Your Body, and it was a process for female identified people to recover their sense of embodiment. And this is something that we see a lot of lately with the oh man, there's a documentary on Netflix right now. It's like a strip down, open up or something, but it's a conversation about women who take a pole dancing class to recover parts of their embodied experience that they've been truncated from because of sexual trauma, emotional trauma, cultural pressures, body image. There is an experience of being in a body. It is not something that just happens. How many of us have hated a part of our body at one time or another? And so part of being queer and being trans and queering the whole world is that you get to re-experience and reclaim and re-identify and reconnect with your body, because it's yours, no one else's. Yeah.
And I think the trauma piece you touched on is really important there, which is something that I think about a lot when I think about reforming justice systems and all kinds of stuff like that. Is that a lot of stuff that we see that we just kind of accept as a normal part of life is actually a sign of trauma, and leaving your body within psychology is referred to as dissociation. There's multiple different ways it can look and feel. If this is interesting to you, I highly recommend Googling it. But dissociation is strongly associated with trauma. There is a dissociation specific diagnosis, but it's also listed as a symptom of many other, mental illnesses, including PTSD. I don't think it's coincidence that being out of your body, in other words, dissociation, is such a common experience in society.
Absolutely.
And I really, really hope that as we start talking about mental health more, we can really get invested in making our overall society less traumatizing for everyone.
It's so true. It's all interconnected. It's all about the thing behind the thing. None of this exists in a vacuum. You know what I mean? Even my identity as queer doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like I would be me outside of a system, but in a system I'm queer, so like there's a whole philosophical train to go off on that, but like nothing happens in a vacuum, and many people have overlapping instances of not liking their body, of being overweight, of being sexually abused, of being trans, of being queer, of being like all of no one is just one of those things. And until you can embrace your embodiment and embrace your identity, there's going to be a lot of cognitive dissonance. And guess what stands in the way of that? Misguided and misconstrued and manipulated ideas of norms that are perpetuated by a society. And that plays out all the way into little old Olean until there's a trans girl who feels scared to identify as a trans girl because she wants to play basketball or something. You know what I mean? It's all in the soup together, and you can't overlook any of that. So, well, I have to.
Absolutely.
I have to go because my computer is going to die. But before we do that, I would absolutely love if you could, if there's anything you want to say in conclusion, you could say that. If there is any way that you want to give people to contact you, you could say that, and just kind of give us your closing thoughts, and then I'll close it up.
As far as contact goes, I would say, through Facebook, I should be tagged and stuff. So feel free to shoot me a message. I'm not the best with social media, since it takes me a minute to get back to you. My apologies.
Nothing personal.
Yeah, exactly. As far as closing thoughts go, I really think it's just so key to keep in mind that trans people are really just trying to love ourselves and be ourselves authentically in public spaces.
Yes.
And all we want to accomplish is for everyone else to be able to do the same thing.
Yes.
This is not, like there is no, we need to destroy gender. It's about how can we make gender work better for everyone. So, engage with us, talk with us, keep an open mind, and also, like, really, I can't stress enough, maybe check out Disclosure.
Yes. Someone just asked about that in the feed, so.
Yeah. Disclosure is a documentary on Netflix that I think really does a good job of explaining where implicit bias against trans people can come from, mainly in the States, but still.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's what I would say for now, but definitely, like, don't hesitate to reach out if y'all have questions or thoughts or anything.
Absolutely. Owen is all up in the conversations group a lot. So they do a great job of jumping in, which I think is a great way to engage. If you can't be a part of the video, if you catch the video later, or if you have a thought that's not encompassed by our video, that's the whole damn point of the conversations group, is to like throw a thought out there and dialogue with somebody about it, because we're all made better by conversations together. So that's huge. I also wanted to mention, so Disclosure, that's on Netflix. There is also a film that talks about the same thing of implicit bias in Native American populations. I mentioned that because that's the first place I heard of implicit bias within a film setting. So the movie is called Real Engine, and it's spelled REEL. And so it talks about the way that Native Americans are portrayed in media, much like Disclosure does with trans people. So that's another thing that you can pick up on. I know we talked about some Native stuff there, and I know that the area I'm in geographically, just so you know, is located about 15 miles from the only Native American reservation in the United States that co-occurs with a city. So I live next to Salamanca, New York. So there's a lot of sociology and stuff there. There's a lot to be learned from the richness of the area. So that's why I mention it so much. For those of you who watched, I want to say thank you. Being queer for me is a reclamation of who I am and how I can be in the world. And I truly believe, like I believe it was Desmond Tutu that said it, like, my liberation is bound up in yours. So liberation and freedom is incomplete unless everyone is there. Racism is not over until homophobia is over, until Islamophobia is over, until fat shaming is over. Like, it's all tied up together. And so the reason that O and I exist in so many ways is so that, like they said, so that it is in fact better for everyone, including the trans girl in Olean who's trying to play basketball. You see how it keeps coming all together, friends? A world that is more queer is better. Fight me on it. Don't fight me on it, because I don't care to fight you, because I'm right.
I mean, hey, Gen Z is continuing to take us there.
Exactly.
It's the new
iteration of the younger generation is more queer than the last.
Exactly. Yeah.
Pretty consistent trend.
Yep. We're going there. And I actually read a study about that today where it talked about how the majority of folks that were identifying as queer were in fact identifying as like bisexual, which I actually think is pretty dope because there are people who are bisexual and there are people who are figuring it out, and you get to be all of those things and identify how you want. So I have to thank everybody that came out. I have a three-peat of conversations coming up. Tomorrow night, we're having conversations with Rocky Raggio, who is the producer and filmmaker behind the upcoming documentary 1946, which covers the introduction of the word homosexuality into the Bible. In case you did not know, the word homosexuality was not in the Bible until 1946. So that film is going to cover the scholarly work that's been done to expose that truth. It's going to cover pro and, for and against sources, and it's going to be really good. So we're talking to Rocky tomorrow. And then Sunday, we have Ryan Bell up, who is a former evangelical minister who gave up Christianity and embraced atheism for a period of a year and then ended up never wandering back. And so we're going to talk to him about his perspective coming from Christianity into atheism and seeing how that's made his world fuller and better and more awesome. So we've got a lot of cool topics coming up, a lot of things across the board, and I'm really excited to share them with you. Thank you, Owen, for being here. Thank you, everybody who's been on the feed for joining us. As always, everyone is welcome at the conversation. Find more about this info on conversationsofficial.com or just shoot the conversations page a message. Thank you so much. Have a good day, Owen. Bye, everybody. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
This has been the Conversations Podcast. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions or comments or just want to get involved, feel free to join the conversation on social media. You can find us at Conversations Official on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And please don't forget to rate, follow, and share this podcast. We're available on Anchor, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining the conversation.